Hi, I'm Julie Franzini. I'm the youth advisor at the First Church in Belmont, and we hosted our first con here in Belmont this February. We hosted a youth social action con, and many of our youth had not even been to cons in the past, so it was somewhat unfamiliar to both them and the adults who were involved in the planning process. We started off 3 months in advance planning and had divided up into several committees that were made up of youth and one adult volunteer who was there as a support person on each of those committees. So we had folks planning the worship, so we had the worship committee, touch group committee, which is the youth who are in charge of what goes on in the small group meetings throughout the con. We had the energy and hospitality committee, which was responsible for figuring out what the policies and rules should be for the con and then presenting those during an opening orientation. And we had a workshop committee who was responsible for figuring out what the social justice theme and focus would be for the con. And for this particular con, we decided on class and classism as the theme and invited trainers from Suburban Justice. But so overall one more.
No, that's okay.
All con committee was in charge of the large group activities and games, get to know you, icebreakers, those sorts of things. So throughout the process, each of the committees met individually, and then we all came back together a few times to line up our parts. We definitely had a lot of adult support since this was the first time Belmont was hosting a con, but after the first initial meeting, the youth were really excited about it, and the adults were too, but the youth were ready to take initiative and do the planning and, really careful in thinking out how things would go and, paying attention to inclusiveness and those sorts of things throughout the entire planning process. And the con ended up being wonderful, and everyone, I think, learned a great deal throughout the process of planning and organizing the con. There's definitely some leadership skills that were learned and practiced, and overall it turned into a really meaningful experience both for the planners and for those who participated in the con.
So you got some feedback afterwards. You told me before about the drumming, and how did that work? How did you gather that feedback? How did they respond informally, or there were forms to fill out? Can you tell me a little bit about how that was planned out and what happened?
Sure. There's definitely, informal feedback. I think there were conversations ongoing throughout the weekend about how things were going and how it felt and those sorts of things. And then we also did a formal feedback process that was sent out online in the form of a survey where both youth and adults who came were able to share their thoughts about what went well and what they would prefer to change next time around.
And what was the thing that came out most popular?
We were all surprised that the drumming workshop, the workshop done by Afro-Brazil, got the most positive feedback, that everyone was really excited about. That it was this really energetic and inclusive workshop regardless of your ability to drum, and everyone had a great time in it.
So I saw there weren't, it's not like everybody was at that, so there was a choice. There were choices during the weekend.
Great. So the section on class and classism that was facilitated by trainers from Suburban Justice, which is a youth and adult team, that was sort of the main focus, and everyone attended those workshops. And then in the afternoon there were breakout sessions where youth and adults were able to self-select what piqued their interest. We had workshops from folks from UU Mass Action, the See and Let Justice Roll did a combo workshop on a living wage. The one by UU Mass Action was focused on the power of story and helping people have their voices heard in a crowded world. And the third workshop was a continuation by Suburban Justice about community organizing. And then for that second set we had the drumming workshop by Afro-Brazil, and a separate space where folks made a huge mural together on equality. And the third workshop was a meditation workshop on finding your inner sanctuary.
So would you do it again?
Absolutely. We had a wonderful time. It ended up being, very worth the effort and, the lack of sleep for 2 days.
But you can always catch up on sleep, right?
Exactly. So it was a lot of fun and very meaningful, and we hope to host again next year. And, ideally we'd like to communicate with other congregations in the district who are also interested in hosting and being part of cons in the future, so that we can, maybe figure out a schedule for the coming year and, rotate which types of cons we have, whether they're leadership development cons, spirituality ones, social action, or so forth.
In general, in terms of youth making the plans and organizing it versus adult making the plans and organizing it, to focus on how that worked. I'm interested about the division of responsibility. How much of the planning is actually done by adults? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I'd say most, if not all, of the planning is done by youth. It's not done by adults. Adults are there as support, to have a support network for the youth and where they can bounce ideas off of. But generally the youth are really excited about initiating and organizing the con. We did a process where each of the committees would organize different activities and then bring one of their activities back to the whole group, and then facilitate it as sort of a trial run, and then had a feedback process. So their peers were also involved in getting the feedback, peers from a different committee, about how it worked and what they would change and that sort of thing. So the youth were completely involved in organizing it and also giving feedback and improving it, so it was ready to go for the actual con. So it was certainly youth initiated and organized.
So did they establish contact with the various people that were brought in? How did that work?
We had a workshop committee that did a process with the whole group about what were some of our social justice interests, and then from there they narrowed it down to a few different topics, and then started contacting and following up with different organizations based here in Boston that might be able to help us out with some workshops, and then based on who was available and that sort of thing, narrow down the selection, and we ended up with a wonderful variety of programming, and so it's really nice. In terms of leadership, it was, the youth in Belmont, their first time leading a con, so we had invited some youth from across the Mass Bay district to help us with the organizing process, and had 6 youth come and join the various committees and also meet with us when we met as a whole con planning team all together. And so it was really, those youth were also instrumental in leadership and getting the con organized, and leading with their experience and helping the other youth in their own planning process.
And if next time you think you're up to speed enough that you can do it now that you've gotten going one time.
Absolutely. I think, both the youth and the adults learned a lot from, the youth who have been through the process before, and now we have a good understanding as to what goes on in a con and what sorts of things to plan and organize. And so I think we're very well prepared to lead a con next year, and I hope, that it is something that we can do every year, so that the youth who've, experienced one the year prior are able to step up and lead it for the next year.
So it could be youth in the district have a terrible dilemma to figure out if a lot of congregations get good at this.
That would be a good dilemma to have, I think.
Okay, thanks.